No one ever taught you how to play this game, and that wasn't by chance. From a young age, you were told that all you had to do was speak well, be honest, express yourself clearly, and everything would be resolved. But in practice, you've already noticed that some people enter any conversation and come out in control, while others talk, explain, justify themselves, and come out smaller than when they went in. This isn't charisma. It's not luck. It's reading. It's silent power. Machiavelli already knew. Whoever understands the body, silence, and gesture governs without needing to raise their voice. What almost no one dares to say is that open communication is a trap for the naive. While you speak, someone observes. While you explain, someone calculates. And while you believe the game is about words, the real game is happening in micro-gestures, pauses, glances, and what is left unsaid. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, begins when you realize that the body always reveals the truth before the mouth. And whoever learns to read this gains an immediate advantage in meetings, negotiations, conflicts, and personal relationships. In this video, you'll learn a method that's never taught publicly because it dismantles invisible hierarchies. A simple, brutal, and applicable method that transforms any conversation into a field of strategic reading. Not to manipulate, but to never be manipulated again. Because in the real world, it's not the best speaker who wins. It's the one who sees first who wins. If something inside you awakened while listening, don't ignore that feeling. This channel isn't about videos, it's about memories. Remember who you were before the fear, before the exhaustion, before the silence. Each new video here is a different reflection of your own soul, an invitation to understand what the world never taught you. The power you seek outside has always been within you. If you feel that this journey speaks to what lives silently within you, sign up now, not to follow yet another creator, but to reconnect with something the world tried to make you forget. Because here, every word was made to heal, each reflection to awaken, and each video serves as a reminder you are not alone on the path back to yourself. Click on subscribe and turn the algorithm into a daily reminder of who you really are. For a long time, it was taught that absolute honesty and unrestricted transparency were universal virtues, almost a moral shortcut to success. And he observes that this belief, however comfortable, stems from a childish reading of the world. In practice, politics guided by reality, not by ideals, shows something else. Those who reveal everything all the time lose room for maneuver. The world functions more like a theater than a confessional. People don't reward emotional purity, they reward useful predictability. Machiavelli already warned that the appearance of virtue is often worth more than virtue itself. Not because the world is evil, but because decisions based on real human nature take into account fear, self-interest, and self-preservation. When someone believes that it is enough to be open, sincere, and good, they end up offering strategic information for free. And in this game, information is power. The mistake is not in being ethical, but in confusing ethics with total exposure. And this mistake is costly, especially for those who still believe that effort and intention are enough. He realizes over time that the social world operates in layers. There is the public discourse, beautiful and acceptable, and there is the silent subtext, where the real decisions are made. It is there that virtue meets fortune, not in fiery speeches or well-intentioned promises. In meetings, for example, those who talk too much often lose strength without realizing it. While one reveals their intentions, another observes, calculates, and keeps quiet. The end justifies the means, not in the vulgar sense, but in the understanding that surviving and advancing requires strategy, not naivete. It is better to be feared than loved, when love comes unaccompanied by respect. And even then, avoid being hated, because hatred creates unnecessary enemies. He learns that excessive transparency does not build trust, it builds vulnerability. Strategic people don't lie all the time, but carefully choose what to show. Like on a chessboard, not every piece needs to move for the opponent to reveal their move. This is where the need arises to destroy, first internally, the mentality of the naive, not with arrogance, but with lucidity. He begins to observe how often those who say everything they think end up being used as a source of information by those who know how to listen. In the professional environment, for example, those who vent too much about frustrations reveal exactly where they can be pressured. Those who maintain strategic silence build their own loyal armies, people who trust because they feel firmness, not exposure. Constant adaptability becomes more valuable than rigid consistency. It's not about becoming cold or cynical, but about understanding that the world doesn't work as it should, but as it is. Naivete is not a sign of purity. Often it's just a lack of understanding of the game. And when he begins to abandon this comfortable illusion, something curious happens. Attention shifts from speaking to observation, and it is precisely there that another figure enters the scene. He understands, sooner or later, that Machiavelli didn't create the world's evil. He merely had the courage to observe it without moral filters. While many prefer to explain human behavior with idealistic discourses, Machiavelli chose to look at what people actually do when power, fear, or advantage are at stake. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, is born precisely from this raw observation. The coldness of calculation is not the exception, it's the silent rule. Predation doesn't always appear with bared teeth, but with smiles, compliments, and vague promises. Decisions based on real human nature require abandoning social romanticism. It's not comfortable, but it's liberating. He realizes that those who understand this stop being negatively surprised. The world ceases to seem unjust and becomes predictable. And predictability in this context is pure strategic advantage. Machiavelli observed that virtue often functions as a mask, an appearance of virtue carefully constructed to navigate safely among conflicting interests. It's not about pretending to be good, but about appearing trustworthy enough not to be attacked. Meanwhile, fortune acts like a capricious mistress. It favors those who are prepared for when she decides to appear. Virtue and fortune walk hand in hand, not by luck, but by constant preparation. He realizes that people who rely solely on good intentions are often overtaken by those who rely on reading the situation. In the corporate world, for example, those who believe that promotions come only from technical merit ignore invisible alliances, ego games, and silent disputes. Those who observe understand that competence is only the ticket. The real game begins after you enter. It is at this point that he begins to differentiate personal morality from social strategy. Machiavelli never advocated gratuitous cruelty. He advocated the calculated use of force when necessary and restraint when not. Better to be feared than loved does not mean being aggressive, but being predictable in firmness. Avoiding being hated remains the rule because enemies have long memories. What he learns from this observant master is simple and uncomfortable. The world does not punish those who understand the game. It punishes those who insist on ignoring it. Naivete protects no one. It only exposes them. And the more he observes, the more he realizes that the real mistake is not in acting strategically, but in reacting emotionally. This perception changes everything because it shifts the focus from reaction to construction. And it is precisely there that a new mentality is born. He begins to perceive a brutal difference between those who react to the world and those who silently build it. The reactive person spends their time putting out emotional fires, responding to stimuli, justifying decisions, and over-explaining. The architect, on the other hand, observes before acting. They don't engage in unnecessary arguments, don't respond to provocations in the heat of the moment, and don't feel obligated to prove anything. This posture doesn't stem from coldness, but from strategy. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, demands understanding that reaction almost always hands power to the other side. Machiavelli made it clear, those who react lose ground, those who build define the terrain. The architect doesn't ask, how do I defend myself? But how do I structure the game so I don't have to defend myself? This mental shift is subtle, yet devastating for those who still live in automatic mode. He learns then to observe people not by what they say, but by what they do when no one is watching. Promises are cheap, patterns are expensive. Decisions based on real human nature take into account repeated behavior, not pretty speeches. At work, for example, he notices who promises support but disappears at the critical moment. In his personal life, he perceives who praises in public but sabotages in silence. The architect records mental data like someone building a fortress. Each interaction becomes information, not emotion. His own loyal armies are not formed with sweet words, but with strategic consistency. The end justifies the means. Here is not cheating, it's lucidity, using what is observed to position oneself better tomorrow, not to win an argument today. Over time, he stops wasting energy trying to be understood by everyone. He understands that being loved indiscriminately comes at too high a price. It's better to be feared than loved when love demands submission or excessive exposure. Even so, avoiding being hated remains a silent rule because the architect thinks long-term. Constant adaptability begins to guide his decisions. He adjusts his posture, tone, and presence according to the environment without losing his inner balance. This isn't about falsehood, but about understanding context. Those who react live exhausted, those who build live proactively. And the more he abandons reactivity, the more he realizes that true power lies not in speaking better, but in observing more. Because by observing, he begins to see patterns invisible to the impulsive. And this completely changes how he reads the social landscape. He begins to see the social environment as a constantly moving chessboard. Nothing is still, even when it seems calm. Every conversation, every absence, every silence occupies an invisible square on the game board. Machiavelli taught that decisions based on real human nature require reading the scenario before any move. Whoever speaks too much reveals their main piece too early. The strategic observer, however, understands that politics guided by reality, not by ideals, requires patience. He begins to map who influences whom, who depends on whom, and who only pretends to be in charge. Real hierarchies rarely coincide with the official organizational chart. True power circulates behind the scenes, not through positions. And those who observe in silence begin to perceive this before everyone else. Over time, he identifies power connections that never appear in public discourse. He notices who interrupts whom, who looks at whom before answering, and who needs constant validation. Virtù and fortuna are revealed in these minute details. In meetings, for example, he observes who speaks after the boss, not during. He observes who agrees too quickly and who takes too long to take a position. These delays almost always hide calculation. The calculated use of force begins with reading, knowing when to advance, when to retreat, and when simply not to move. Better to be feared than loved becomes less about intimidation and more about strategic predictability. Those who are perceived as stable, firm, and difficult to manipulate naturally gain ground without raising their voices. Gradually, he learns to identify weaknesses, vanities, and fears without confronting anyone directly. An ego-driven manager reacts poorly to subtle criticism. An insecure competitor reveals anxiety through excessive justifications. Avoiding being hated remains essential, so he doesn't expose these vulnerabilities. He only records them. His own loyal armies form when he protects sensitive information and distributes recognition surgically. The end justifies the means here appears as practical intelligence, using knowledge of the game to avoid being anyone's pawn. And the more he observes, the more he understands that the real game isn't in the visible moves, but in the spaces between them. It is there, in what is left unsaid, that power begins to condense. He begins to realize something few notice. The most valuable information is almost never in the words themselves, but in the spaces between them, in what is left unanswered, in what is avoided, in what changes the subject too quickly. Machiavelli understood this clearly. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, demands attention to silence as much as to discourse. Those who talk too much are usually trying to convince. Those who remain silent are generally evaluating. Real power is born from this asymmetry. While one delivers arguments, the other collects data. Decisions based on real human nature consider that people reveal more when they believe they are in control of the conversation. And strategic silence creates precisely this illusion. In the hallways, in cafes, during seemingly irrelevant breaks, he realizes that the real game happens. It's not in the formal meeting, but before and after it. A glance exchanged when someone enters the room. A long pause before an "I think so." Virtù and fortuna manifest themselves in these micro-events, invisible to those who only listen to words. Better to be feared than loved here translates into something simple, being someone whose reaction is not obvious. Predictable people are easy to control. Those who maintain emotional control and respond little force the other to expose themselves more. Avoiding being hated remains essential, so silence never comes laden with contempt, but with firm neutrality. He learns that hierarchies are fluid and constantly negotiated, even when they seem fixed. Today, someone is in charge. Tomorrow it depends on them. One's own loyal armies are not built by speaking loudly, but by listening attentively and protecting information. The calculated use of force begins with self-control. Not filling every silence, not responding to every provocation, not explaining everything. The end justifies the means appears as an economy of energy and positioning. He who masters the unspoken sees before acting. And the more he trains this silent listening, the more he realizes that observing is not passive, it is offensively invisible. Because, by listening without speaking, he begins to see subtle patterns in the behavior of others, patterns that require more refined reading techniques. He develops what he likes to call a hawk's eye, a trained attention to how something is said, not what is said. Machiavelli had already indicated that decisions based on real human nature require reading form, not just content. The tone of voice that rises slightly at the end of a sentence, the haste in responding, the excess of detail to explain something simple, all this reveals more than any speech. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, demands that he observe rhythm, hesitation, and emotional security. A practical example. When someone answers a delicate question too quickly, they are often trying to end the matter before it escalates. The architect registers this mentally, without confronting, without reacting. Information stored is worth more than a one argument. Over time, he begins to notice almost imperceptible facial micro-expressions, a clenched jaw, excessive blinking, a shift in gaze at the exact moment of decision. Virtù and fortuna are revealed in these microseconds. It's not necessary to become an expert in clinical body language. Constant attention is enough. In negotiations, for example, he observes the body before the verbal response. If the torso recoils slightly, there is resistance. If the person crosses their arms after agreeing, the agreement is weak. The calculated use of force begins there, knowing when to insist and when to retreat. Better to be feared than loved, in this context, means being perceived as someone attentive, difficult to deceive, and yet avoiding being hated, never directly exposing these perceptions. Strategic silence becomes his favorite tool. He learns to ask simple questions and stop. He doesn't finish the other person's sentence. He doesn't dwell on awkward silences. He lets the space do its work. The end justifies the means here, appears as social intelligence. The more the other person talks, the more patterns, insecurities, and vanities they reveal. His own loyal armies form when he uses this information to protect, guide, and position, not to humiliate. Constant adaptability guides his responses. Sometimes he elaborates, sometimes he changes the subject, sometimes he ends the conversation early. And the more he practices these techniques, the more he realizes that observation is a trainable skill, not a rare gift. It just takes attention, patience, and emotional control. And upon mastering these tools, an inevitable question arises: what truly motivates the people behind all this? He comes to understand that no one acts for a single reason, despite almost everyone trying to appear simple and consistent. Behind every decision lie layers of fear, greed, the need for approval, and the desire for power. Machiavelli observed this with surgical coldness. Decisions based on real human nature require going beyond the official narrative. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, begins when one accepts that discourse is only the tip of the iceberg. A boss may talk about results, but what motivates him is status. A colleague may defend justice, but the driving force is insecurity. The naive person's mistake is believing the explanation. The strategist's advantage is investigating the motive. And motive is not declared. It is revealed in repeated behavior. With practice, he learns to ask himself silent internal questions while observing. What does this person gain if this succeeds? What do they lose if they fail? Virtù and fortuna appear when these answers become clear. In professional environments, for example, he notices that some leaders decide quickly not out of confidence, but out of fear of appearing weak. Others postpone everything because delay protects them from responsibility. The calculated use of force begins by aligning one's actions with the other's hidden motivation. Better to be feared than loved here means not being mistaken for someone naive or easily manipulated. And avoiding being hated requires never exposing these motives in public, only considering them in the strategy. He understands then that greed and self-interest are not moral failings, but central driving forces of the world. His own loyal armies are built when he offers something that speaks to those interests without submitting to them. Constant adaptability guides his approach. With some, he offers security; with others, visibility; with others, efficiency. The end justifies the means emerges as intelligent pragmatism, using the correct interpretation to avoid fighting the wrong battles. Those who ignore the real motives become frustrated. Those who understand them take a stand. And the more he learns to map these invisible forces, the more he realizes that observation is not enough. There comes a point where interpretation needs to become direction. And that's where a fine line emerges between influence and manipulation. He learns that there is a subtle yet decisive difference between manipulating people and exercising strategic influence. Manipulation is disguised brute force. Influence is invisible architecture. Machiavelli never taught how to control minds, but how to understand the game so as not to be controlled. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, shows that those who try to bend others against their nature create silent resistance. Those who understand the underlying motives can guide without pushing. Decisions based on real human nature start from the principle that people like to feel they have chosen for themselves. The strategist does not impose. He organizes the scenario so that the natural choice coincides with the path he has already foreseen. With the correct mapping of vulnerabilities, influence becomes almost organic. A colleague driven by recognition responds better to public praise than to financial bonuses. An insecure leader prefers solutions that preserve their image, even if they are not the most efficient. Virtù and fortuna appear when they understand this before others. The calculated use of force here is minimal. An adjustment in tone, a strategic pause, a well-placed question. Better to be feared than loved means being perceived as someone who understands the game, not as someone who forces results. And avoiding being hated requires never using these readings to humiliate or expose, but to intelligently align interests. He discovers that channeling others' ambitions for mutual benefit is one of the rarest and most powerful skills. His own loyal armies form when people feel they grow by walking alongside him. The end justifies the means emerges as mature pragmatism, using a deep understanding of the other to build alliances, not enemies. Constant adaptability guides his choices. Sometimes he leads, sometimes he retreats, sometimes he lets the other believe they had the idea. And the more he practices this silent influence, the more he realizes that observing and directing are not enough on their own. At certain times, it is necessary to know when to act forcefully, and that's where two essential figures in Machiavelli's thought come in. He then understands one of Machiavelli's most powerful images. The fox and the lion are not opposites. They are complementary. The fox sees traps before they close. The lion drives away wolves before they test limits. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, demands this dual competence. Force alone without understanding becomes blind brutality. Understanding alone without action becomes sterile intelligence. Decisions based on real human nature require balance. Observe first, act later. He realizes that many fail not for lack of ability, but for using the wrong archetype at the wrong time. There are times when silence protects. There are times when a firm presence resolves everything without a word. The fox appears when he analyzes scenarios, reads hidden intentions, and detects emotional traps. It is the fox who perceives when praise hides future demands, or when an opportunity comes with an invisible cost. Virtù and fortuna favor those who recognize these signs early. The lion enters when ambiguity needs to end. The calculated use of force does not mean aggression, but non-negotiable clarity. A no said with a firm posture, a limit set without excessive explanation. Better to be feared than loved here is not about physical fear, but about structural respect. People test how far they can go. The lion makes it clear where the territory ends. He learns that switching between fox and lion requires emotional self-control and keen reading of the environment. His own loyal armies are formed when people know he is fair but not permissive, observant but not passive. Avoiding being hated remains the rule, so strength never comes with humiliation, only with limits. The end justifies the means appears as strategic maturity, acting firmly when silence ceases to work. Constant adaptability guides this alternation. Today a fox, tomorrow a lion, as the game demands. And when he masters this dance between observing and acting, something changes definitively. He understands that true power lies not in strength or cunning alone, but in the consciousness that integrates both. He arrives at a simple and uncomfortable realization. The world doesn't reward brute effort. It rewards quiet efficiency. Working hard without understanding the situation is like running in circles. Machiavelli already made it clear that politics guided by reality, not ideals, requires awareness of the game at hand. Victory isn't about being the strongest, fastest, or most intelligent in the traditional sense, but about seeing things first. Decisions based on real human nature stem from asking the right question, not from good intentions. Virtù and fortuna meet when preparation and perception go hand in hand. The most common mistake is confusing merit with results. The world doesn't measure character, it measures impact. And impact is born from clarity, not emotional effort. He understands that awareness is the ultimate advantage because it anticipates conflicts before they arise. Those who observe patterns don't need to put out fires. The calculated use of force becomes rare because many battles cease to happen. Better to be feared than loved here translates to something subtle, being respected as someone difficult to deceive. Avoiding being hated remains essential because awareness also teaches when not to act. Loyal armies are built when people feel stability, predictability, and a correct understanding of the environment. The end justifies the means appears as elevated pragmatism, less wear and tear, more positioning. In the end, he realizes that observation is an invisible asset. No one applauds those who see things first, but everyone feels the effect afterward. Constant adaptability becomes his hallmark, adjusting without getting lost, changing without explaining, advancing without fanfare. He doesn't need to dominate anyone. He just needs to avoid being dominated. Awareness doesn't draw attention, but it decides destinies. And when someone understands this, something curious happens. Conversation ceases to be an exchange of words and becomes an exchange of signals. The body speaks before the mouth. Silence weighs more than arguments. And whoever learns to read this gains an immediate advantage in any interaction. Now, the inevitable question is, what are you going to do with all this? Because this kind of knowledge isn't about impressing anyone, it's about repositioning you in the real world. From now on, every conversation can cease to be a field of exhibition and become a field of interpretation. Every meeting can cease to be a battle of words and become an analysis of power. The body always speaks. Silence always reveals something. And those who learn to observe stop being carried away by the flow and begin to decide the course. Think about the last few times you left a conversation feeling drained, confused, or less than when you went in. Did you talk too much, fill silences, explain things that didn't need explaining? Now imagine the opposite, observing more, speaking less, responding precisely, and acting consciously. Machiavelli never proposed cruelty, he proposed lucidity. Politics guided by reality, not ideals. The world doesn't change because you're good. It changes when you understand how it works. So I ask you, in how many conversations are you still playing the wrong game? How many decisions do you make without realizing who is actually driving the interaction? And most importantly, how much power are you handing over without realizing it? If this content opened your eyes, apply it. Observe today, test tomorrow, adjust later. And if you want to continue learning how to read the real game, something no one teaches publicly, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, the idea isn't to speak louder, it's to see it first.